It is my great honor that I introduce to you our first keynote speaker, Kim Atkinson. Kim has worked in the early years profession for over 30 years. She is proud and very grateful to have been in the first cohort of the ECEBC Leadership along with Daniel Davies. Together, Kim and Danielle created the Images of Learning project, an exhibit that highlights the work of ECEs and the competencies of young children. They have traveled throughout different regions of BC, facilitating engaging dialogue and workshops for ECEs, teachers, instructors, and administrators. Kim currently works with the University of Victoria, supporting educators to engage in dialogue on new ideas about quality care and education. Kim's inspirational and thought-provoking articles have been published nationally and have been a required reading in college and university courses. Please join me and welcome Kim.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carla, for that introduction. It's such an honor for me to be here speaking to you today. And it was such an honor to be asked to speak to this leadership community that ECEBC has brought together. And I really would like to acknowledge ECEBC for the work that they have put into collectively bringing us together to talk about leadership. They started this in 2007, I think it was. And it's really visionary and very bold to take on something as intangible as leadership and create such a commitment and develop such capacity within our field towards thinking about leadership. It's very bold, and I would like to acknowledge how wonderful I think that the initiative is, and how much impact it's had on me personally, and the ripple effects it's continuing to have in the province. So I think I would like to acknowledge how grateful I am that I was included in that first cohort, and it was definitely a life-changing experience. All right. I would like to begin with a story. This is a story about Nathan, and it was told to me by a colleague that I work with through my work at the University of Victoria Community Facilitators Project. The educator, Colleen, told me this story. And it happened this day that Nathan decided that the slide was closed. So he sat himself down at the bottom of the slide and he told everybody the slide is closed. And he just sat at the bottom and made that very loudly known to everyone. Well, of course, no one listened to him. And they just kept coming down the slide and scooting off the sides. Scooting off the sides, coming down the slide, scooting off the sides. And this is making Nathan very angry, and he's getting louder. And he's saying, the slide is closed. Nobody is listening to him. And he's really getting frustrated. Then another little guy, Kevin, comes along, and Kevin comes down the slide, and he doesn't scoot off the slide. He slams right into Nathan. And Nathan's mad, and he's crying, and he's yelling, and he's saying the slide is closed, and Kevin just keeps coming down the slide and banging into him. So Colleen, the educator, is watching this and hovering around and thinking and questioning and wondering. She says to Nathan at the bottom, you know you can move any time and not get hit by this child coming down the slide. He's not having any part of that. He is staying where he is, and he's just yelling at everybody and telling everybody the slide is closed. So she's really curious. Colleen is very curious about how long he would stay there, getting hit. And so she's wondering, questioning, thinking, and then Kevin's mother comes in to the yard, and she watches what's going on. Her son, Kevin, is banging into Nathan. And she says to Colleen, why don't you stop this? And Colleen says, well, I told him he could move. I told Nathan he could move, and it's clear that he could move any time. But she really had no explanation. She really was struggling with how to say to the parent why she didn't want to stop this. So Colleen and then eventually the mother of Kevin took Kevin home, and that was the end of that. Well, Colleen and I talked about this story for quite a few days afterwards. She talked to her colleagues about this many times. She talked to the students that she had. She talked to everybody that she met about this story because it created a lot of curiosity for her. It was a provocative story. It is a provocative story. And I think that if we just all shut this down right now at your tables, you could discuss this story. You would have an opinion about this story, I bet. Things that Colleen could or couldn't have done, things that you would have said to the child, things that you might have said to the parent. This is a provocative story. This is a pedagogical narration. And this is what I would like to talk about today, is pedagogical narration as an enactment of leadership. So that is, leadership can be defined in a few ways. And Peter Moss, who is a scholar from Britain, he talks about thinking about leadership in two ways. He says there's major politics, local, regional, and national government influencing public policies that affect the lives of children, parents, and educators in early years settings. Now, I know there's wonderful leaders that do this kind of work in this room. Those of you who are on boards, who are involved in the political process, who develop policy, and that is the kind of leadership that is so valuable in our community. We need more of it, and thank you for those of you that do that kind of leadership. The second kind of leadership is minor politics, critically thinking about practice, challenging taken for granted assumptions, and opening spaces to think differently. And this is the kind of leadership that I've been involved in my career. And this is the kind of leadership that I would like to talk to you about today. The kind of leadership that sometimes goes unacknowledged. The kind of leadership that all of us do in our practice, that we can do, that we can think about. So what Peter Moss is asking us in this quote is to think about quality, to think about what is quality. What does quality mean? We use that word quality a lot in our field. We hear that term used a lot. Quality historically has been associated with rating scales, environmental checklists, with ratios, with terms like developmentally appropriate practice, evidence-based practice, minimum standards. That is how we've recognized quality, how we talk about quality. But there are many, many scholars, many people, early childhood educators and beyond, and others in British Columbia, in Sweden, in Italy, in Australia, and in other places around the world that are challenging us to think about that quality. Challenging us to think beyond those minimum standards and question what quality means. Can we really measure quality in a checklist? Our work with children and families is so relational. Every setting is different. Every setting is local to its place. Every setting is this measure of quality that assumes that there is a checklist and a minimum standard assumes that there is a universal way to do quality. That if we just do this, it will be quality, and that can be replicated from place to place to place. Our work cannot be replicated in place to place to place, and our work cannot be measured in a checklist. Our work is very situated to our communities, our families, who we are, who our team is, that we're working with, the kind of setting, the childcare setting that we're working within, the families that we're working with. What looks like quality in one place might not be quality in another place. There is no universal standard for quality. There are many, many ways of thinking about quality. And that is what we need to be doing, is thinking about all the ideas that we can, discussing all the ways, all the thinking that behind what can quality look like, and inviting many, many ways of looking at quality rather than a universal one-size-fits-all standard of what quality can look like. So these scholars are asking us to think about questions like, what does it mean to be a human being? What is our image of the child, the educator, parent, and school? What is education for? What are the fundamental values of education? What ethics? These are the kinds of questions that I hope that we can begin to talk about more in our field. It's not like we're going to find an answer for these questions. The importance is the discussion. The importance is continuing to open ourselves to having those kinds of conversations. And we don't need to agree. The idea is that there will be many answers, very individual and situated answers to these questions. We don't need to come up with one answer. We have to acknowledge that there will be many answers. In this photograph, that boy has his coat on upside down. He's wearing bare feet, and it is not summer. He is standing on a pile of wood that is scrap lumber, and it is not steady. He has piled that pile up, and it is uneven. And he is using a sharp stick to poke holes in a scrap piece of construction material. In the setting where he is cared for, that is what quality looks like. Is that quality? In this child care setting that I visit regularly in my work, they take toddlers outside every single day into the forest. Those toddlers some of them are walking and some of them are crawling. And they climb through the forest. Those educators do not keep those children on a trail or a pathway. Those educators place themselves in a very large triangle, educator, educator, educator. And they keep track of all the children, but they don't speak about it. It's kind of a nonverbal thing. I've got 5, you've got 3. That kind of thing. They're counting heads, but they're doing it quietly. Those children can roam in that area. They are rolling down gullies if they stumble and fall, which as toddlers they do. They go crawling through the undergrowth, through the slough. And these educators are not always rescuing them when they get stuck or when they cry. These educators are allowing these children to struggle, and they don't rush to help them. They recognize the competencies of these children and know that these children can make it through whatever scrub they get themselves caught into. They have a strong relationship with these children. They know these children well. They know what they're capable of. And so that's what quality looks like in that setting. In this setting, they're using big giant screwdrivers, hammers, and power tools to break up big pieces of slate. These children have been using power tools for a few years now. They're very good at it. They built a rack for their backpacks outside and affixed it to the wall of the child care center, so they had somewhere to put their racks. And they figured out how to keep the sawdust away from the drill when it's But it's not just what we're doing with children, the materials that we're providing children. It's not just about the environment that we're providing children. It's also how we think about children, how we think about knowledge, how we think about our role, what we think about what education and care and what we should be doing with children. This tree is in the yard of a child care center that I visit. And one day one of the little boys came up to the educator and he said, "Look at that tree. Look at how all those big branches at the top all grew down into one big branch at the bottom." And the educators thought, teachable moment. I know the right answer to this. And she was all set to give him the scientific truth about how trees grow. And she stopped herself. And she thought, there is a scientific truth here about how trees grow. And it's an important truth, and we're not going to say it's not an important truth. But there's a lot of different kinds of knowledges about a tree. People identify with trees. There is spiritual connections to trees. There are stories about trees. There are art installations and poetry and music that are inspired by trees. There are many, many ways of knowing a tree. There are many legends and myths and cultural significances to trees. This idea that I need to tell this child that his story is not correct, that I have that scientific truth, that one way of thinking about a tree, is that the most important thing I have to tell that child about a tree? She thought, if I don't listen to this child's story, if I say to him, that's a nice story, but here's the real truth, what will happen to the other stories he wants to tell me? And is his story any more or less important than the story I have to tell about that tree? So she didn't say anything. She just listened and smiled, and that became part of the story about that tree. So my good friend and colleague that many of you know, Danielle Davis, says, the politics of niceness, sacrificing our values and pedagogy so as not to offend others. We need to normalize the act of questioning. And this is something that I think is a really important thing to think about in our practice, to create cultures within our field and within our teams where questioning is the norm, where we think together and it's not taken as a personal criticism, it's taken as a culture of curiosity. So pedagogical narration is a form of leadership. These kinds of stories that I've told you today are pedagogical narrations. They are provocative stories that engage us in dialogue to think about quality. So this is some things that I would like you to think about today with regard to leadership and pedagogical narrations. It means that when we're talking about these stories, that we're not talking about these stories so that we can reinscribe what we already know, reinforce what we already think. We need to be open. We need to be open to change, to difference, to thinking differently, and to the opinions and the ideas of others. We need to be able to talk about these things within a group. It's very hard to do this by ourselves. We need a group to talk with. We need people to share with, to challenge us, and to be challenged by. We need to give a push to people who you see have the potential to tell a story, to take it out there, to make it public, to do a workshop, to write an article, to share a narration. We need to give those people a nudge. And we need to be able to accept a nudge from other people to say, when they say, we think you can do this, and take that nudge and feel that if they have confidence in us that maybe we can do it. And don't get too comfortable. If we get too comfortable in our practice, we're not challenging ourselves. We talk a lot about children taking risks. We as educators need to take risks too, to try something different, try something new, change something in your practice, take away the rule, take away the clock, do something different. Challenge yourself and then talk about it. Iris Berger is a scholar at UBC who has written extensively about pedagogical narrations and leadership. And she said, leadership is enacted when the insertion of provocative stories about children's words and actions invites others to expand their understanding about themselves as educators, parents, and citizens, as well as expanding their understanding about children's ways of being in the world and making room for plurality, making room for many ways, many ideas, many knowledges, many ways of seeing, many perspectives. And I'll leave you with this. Understanding that we can truly be leaders by thinking with others, by creating spaces for creativity, experimentation, innovation, and uncertainty is not just empowering, it is a paradigm shift in our identity. From such a shift, the possibilities are extraordinary. Thank you very much. Hi, Michelle.
I'm Michelle Gilmore. I'm an early childhood educator from Victoria. I just had a quick question about what you said around the minimum standards, assuming there's a universal standard for quality, which I fully understand that and I agree with it, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that around when the reality is that we are having to work in that environment of licensing regulations and all of those types of things, how do those two worlds kind of reconcile themselves?
I think it's very, very important to have standards. We need standards. We need to be accountable for our environments, for our safety, for our cleanliness, for our health, and so forth. But I don't think that that necessarily means that those standards means quality. So I think we need to have those standards, but I don't think that necessarily translate to an automatic definition of quality. So I think that's is that what you mean? I think that we're talking about quality as something situated, thoughtful, contextual, and ongoing discussions around what quality looks like. So not to say we shouldn't have the standards, but just not to necessarily equate that very simply with quality.
Executive Director at West Coast Child Care Resource Centre. I just wanted to make more of a comment. Kim, you used in your references both Danielle and Iris as well as Peter Moss, and I just want to thank you for pointing out people that we know who live among us, who do this work very, very well, and they're not just all experts from afar.
Oh, yes.
And I just really appreciate you doing that, so thank you.
Oh, and I really thank you for acknowledging that, because I really believe that we have within us the leadership capacity to be working alongside one another and having these conversations and quoting one another and giving each other those nudges and taking those nudges into those leadership positions to do the writing, to do the articles, to share the narrations, to share the thinking, the learning, and the workshops. So thank you. I appreciate your acknowledgement of that. Hi, Emily.
Hi. I'm interested in knowing your thoughts about engaging children to understand what quality means to them in their own programs.
Great question. I think it's a very important part of what we're thinking about here, which I didn't talk about, but the idea of listening to children is really a valid point to acknowledge, and thank you for bringing that forward. Asking children, listening to children, and listening with intention, listening beyond what, sometimes we ask questions because we think, and we're waiting for the answer we want to hear from children. And they are used to figuring out what they think we want to hear. So moving past that and really creating spaces where children are heard. And that can be listening through their verbal language, but it's also very important to be listening to those nonverbal ways of communicating that children have. And there's wonderful articles about there. There's the Mosaic approach from Britain, and Carlina Rinaldi and the Reggio Children approach. There's a lot of beautiful literature out there about thinking very deeply about listening to children. So I think that's a very important point. Thank you for bringing that.